Hello, everyone. So today we continue to talk about what changes the cities were going through in the late Roman period. And um, uh, as we discussed last time, and they did so as built structures, as political entities, and as economic spaces, but also as urban communities. So they're going through these truly fundamental shifts. So one of the significant contexts that we should consider here is the comparative vitality of urban structures in what's usually known West versus East. So today we'll start talking about this particular aspect, and I suggest that we do so through the concept that is used a lot in sociology, so the concept of agency, which also leads us to the question um, who owns the city and whose the city is. So that's rather large uh, historiographic and theoretical background. So you'll find the full bibliography in the pre-circulated files, and this is just a selection. So we go basically through Henri Lefebvre's The Right to the City, and its very particular late 1960s context to recent titles by like Carlos Machado and, for instance, the edited volume by Albusin. Um, so, what are some ways to lay claim or own city space? So, to give you just a selection, and quite on top of just physically owning or funding a bit of a urban landscape, you could claim spaces by religious processions like John Chrysostom or Ambrose of Milan did in the fourth century by walking the city with throngs of their supporters, often in violent clashes with doctrinal opponents like Ambrose did in Milan, which he described in his letter to Marcellina. You can also have a very different take, as Libanius did, and have a literally text as a claim on the city, as he famously did in his oration on Antioch. Um, quite on top of owning city space, people could be excluded from it, as Christians had before, but that's a very complex question that we partially covered in earlier lectures. This entire narrative of persecution, as you remember, it's not as straightforward as it might seem. Anyway, people like homosexuals, for instance, here, this absolutely stunning and blood-chilling inscription from the gate of Thessaloniki, guaranteeing to whoever was entering that no barbarians or men sleeping with men are to be found in the city. Um, but what we will focus on today is one of the best documented shrines of late antique society, so high-standing imperial office holders, who have the dentist archaeological and literary record, and including honorific inscriptions. And we'll start by exploring what sort of things can be what an honorific inscription is. It is a double monument, a combination of a honorific base and statue on top. And we'll be looking at one particular honorific base by Flavius Anthemius Isidorus. But before we look at the actual text and what it tells us, let's look at the career of Isidorus, because that's very typical. So, hailing from Egypt, he becomes governor, so proconsul of Asia, then prefect of Constantinople, then praetorian prefect of Illyricum, and ultimately goes on to become consul in Rome. So that's a really outstanding career. In this dedication that he receives at Ephesus, at a really important place, in the lower Umbellus, studded with dozens of honorific inscriptions, and in front of the famous structure we now call Library of Silsis and the Arch of Museus Mithridates, he has this inscribed. So what's stunning here? That's a confluence of things that might seem counterintuitive to come together. That's a really high literary diction, harping back on Homer, combination of conventional epigraphic formulas like Agate Tuche, to good fortune, the invocation of Demeter and her wealth of fruit bearing, and the Christian cross. So, as a statement of his, being literally inscribed into the local Ephesian urban landscape, he goes for this really interesting coalescence and confluence of what is official and what is actually the discourse of officialdom versus what is Christian. Also, it's interesting to know that although the inscription doesn't say so explicitly, by comparison with other typical inscriptions, both in Ephesus and in broader Asia Minor, we can say that it was dedicated not by any particular named individual, such as an emperor, but by the city itself, by the urban community, who had means and interest to do so. And if we just hop over to the Latin-speaking part of the later Roman world, the situation is completely different. First, the sheer number of surviving honorific inscriptions from the 5th century is just under 20. As opposed to literally hundreds of inscriptions dedicated in the 5th century in Asia Minor. And also, we don't see urban communities active there. So this is actually the only inscription from the 5th century that is dedicated by an urban community. So the people of the city, Ordo et Populus, Penaphranae, obviously, urban communities are not up to the task, are not interested in dedicating anything. They're in a very different setup. So, to wrap up this bit of today's lecture, so what do honorific statues reveal as evidence? So, first, obviously, real craving for public space, claim through epigraphy, coalescence of Christian and official discourse and thinking. And also, they do highlight the fundamental differences in how urban communities fare in the 5th century in the West and in the East. So whoever has questions, please address me personally or via mail, and see you next time. Thanks. Bye.